प्रश्नमा एक त साउथ एसियाबाट बौद्ध धर्म पुरै हराएको त होइन, सेन्ट्रल साउथ एसियाबाट हराएको हो।
First of all, to clarify, Buddhadharma did not really disappear completely from all of South Asia. It disappeared from Central South Asia. It actually remained and continued on in Nepal, in the Himalayan region, and in our Kathmandu Valley, which until recently used to be called Nepal itself or Nepal Valley. In the Chittagong area of Bangladesh as well, Buddhadharma is still extant. This place became known popularly as Chittagong later, a name actually distorted by the British from the original, which was Chaityagaon, or village of stupas. And Buddhadharma still continues there. The people of the Barua community, whose ancestors had taken refuge with the Buddha himself, are still found there. Similarly, Buddhism is extant in Bhutan too. And all of these places are also South Asia. And if we are to consider Tibet also to be a part of South Asia, then Buddhadharma has been fully flourishing in Tibet as well. But in a certain sense, it was like as if Buddhadharma had been fully lost in the Indian subcontinent or Bharatvarsha or South Asia. And in India itself, it has only been brought back because of Baba Saheb Ambedkar. Now there are many people, especially those coming from a Hindu background, who assert that Buddhism disappeared because it was comprised of mostly monks and priority was given to monks without providing much for lay people. But based on what Bhagwan Buddha himself said to Mara, as is found in the Parinibbana Sutta of the Digha Nikaya, this is not true. And we have talked about this before, that when Mara came to the Buddha and requested him to leave, the Buddha clearly told him, "Do not worry, Mara. I had decided that I would not relinquish my body until the 4 categories have been established. And now all 4 are complete and they are able to continue on." And what were these 4 categories? They include the categories of bhikshu or monks, bhikshuni or nuns, upasak or male lay practitioner, and upasika or female lay practitioner. The Buddha thus made the resolution to relinquish his body only because he had already fully established and prepared these 4 categories, so that they could continue on their own. So from this, it is apparent that Buddhadharma is not just for monks. Now the Theravada tradition is only one branch of the Shravakyan tradition. There were once numerous branches of the Shravak tradition. There were around 18 to 22 Shravak Nikayas that existed in South Asia in the past, such as Mahasangik, Dharmaguptik, Sarvastivad, Staviravad, Vibhajyavad, etc. These have all disappeared now except for Theravada. The Tripitaks of the Dharmaguptik and the Sarvastivad were translated and still exist in the Chinese and Tibetan languages. But the original ones in the languages of South Asia, that is in the Indic languages such as Prakrit, Pali, Paishachi, etc., were lost. And when we look at the Theravada tradition as it stands now, it seems like only monks are taught the philosophy and practice, and that householders only help take care of the monks and do some circumambulations of stupas. It has been going on like this for many years. But Theravada was not like this originally. And it was because of this later focus on monks that Jetavan Sayadaw, Lady Sayadaw, etc. started teaching Vipassana to lay people.
तर यो नयाँ होइन, किनभने भगवान बुद्धकै टाइममा अनागामी भएका, हैन, शक्तिदागामी भएका, श्रोतापन्न भएका टन्नै गृहस्थहरू थिए.
But teaching householders is in fact not a new practice. There were many householders during the time of Bhagwan Buddha himself who were anagamis or non-returners, sakridagamis or once returners, and shrotapannas or stream enterers. But even if we were to consider that Buddhadharma disappeared because it was focusing only on monks, and monks alone do all the practices and such, and that there was really no place for householders in it, then by that logic, the Theravada tradition should also have disappeared. But the Theravada tradition is still thriving in Thailand, Burma, Laos, Cambodia, and Sri Lanka. So this line of reasoning is not congruent with the facts and it is not logical. So how did Buddhadharma disappear from South Asia? By a process that included a long history of persecution, harassment, and oppression of Buddhists by the Vedic Brahmins, continuing on to the later Hindus, and culminating in its full destruction by the Islamic invasion. We will talk about these various events today. I have mentioned some of these points previously as well, but I will present them in the context of the question here. In 321 BCE, Chanakya made Chandragupta Maurya the king of the Maurya kingdom. He had also taken the help of the Kirat king of Nepal at that time to accomplish this. And the famous King Ashok of this same dynasty became king in 268 BCE. A few generations later, in 187 BCE, Brihadrat became the king of the same dynasty. But Brihadrat was killed by his own commander, Pushyamitra Shunga, who was pro-Hindu and pro-Brahmin. Pushyamitra seized the kingdom, and the Maurya dynasty ended in this way. And Pushyamitra, on his part, repressed Buddhadharma and persecuted, tortured, and harassed Buddhists over a long period of time. Many stupas were destroyed, many monasteries were destroyed, many monks were killed. These accounts of Pushyamitra are found in the text Divya Avadan, and they are now also substantiated from the archaeological perspective. There was a bit of uncertainty earlier on as to whether Pushyamitra did take such actions or not, due to skepticism that someone who was a commander in the service of a king of the Maurya dynasty could do such things. And also, some Shunga kings who came after him had constructed a few monasteries as well, as the Shungas ruled for about 100 years. But now there have been corroborations from many sources that Pushyamitra did do those things against Buddhadharma. Then, a strategy was initiated in Hindu Dharma, particularly by the Brahmins, to generate hatred and aversion among the populace towards Buddhadharma. How? Through the writing of the Purans. The various Purans were written from the 3rd to the 15th centuries. None of the Purans are older than that. This can easily be determined by the fact that they refer to the names of the kings or of the events of the century they were written in. Thus, the strategy was initiated with the Purans, and actually a little bit earlier with the Ramayana, which is from 100 BCE. The Valmiki Ramayana is considered to be the oldest of the Ramayans, and according to the story itself, it was written by Valmiki during the time of Ram. There are stories in there of Lava and Kush staying in Valmiki's ashram and such. And which period is Ram from? He is supposed to be from the Satya Yuga, or the age of truth. And when was the period of Satya Yuga? It is considered to have been 10 or 20,000 years ago. Now there are two things that stand out when we look at the Jaivali Prakaran of the Ayodhya Kanda of the Ramayana. The first is the word Ayodhya, which is famous these days due to the case of Hindus having claimed the spot where the Babari mosque was situated and subsequently demolished. And now they want to build a temple there. At the same time, Indian Buddhists, or Buddhists who are followers of Ambedkar, have also been claiming the same spot as theirs, citing that there are no archaeological findings related to Ram there, but evidence of a monastery having been there once has been found. But the point here is that from the time of the Buddha to the time when King Brihadrat was killed, that is around 185 BCE, that place was actually called Saket. It is called Saket in the Buddhist texts when referring to the teachings the Buddha gave there. It was still called Saket until the time Pushyamitra Shunga killed King Brihadrat.
अब अयोध्या काण्ड भनेपछि यो के हो यो प्रश्न उठ्छ तर वाल्मीकि रामायण सबभन्दा पुरानोमा अयोध्या काण्ड छ साकेत काण्ड होइन.
Now the question arises as to what the Ayodhya Kanda or book section of the Ramayana is then. The oldest Ramayana, which is the Valmiki Ramayana, has a section called the Ayodhya Kanda. It is not called the Saket Kanda. So many questions can be raised about this. Because Saket was a Buddhist region from the time of the Buddha, and there is much archaeological evidence that the area used to be full of monasteries. And, as I just mentioned earlier, no evidence was found of Ram by India's own archaeological department. They only found a small temple of Ram which was constructed much later. Next, let's go to the Jaivali Prakaran of the Ayodhya Kanda. There, Jaivali asks Ram about the Tathagata Buddha, about what Ram thinks of him. Now, what does it indicate that this question was asked of Ram? Was Ram from before the time of the Buddha or after the Buddha? The question would be asked of Ram only if the Buddha was from an earlier period than Ram. This is a point that deserves some reflection. And again in that section, Ram says this about the Buddha.
यथा हि चोर तथा हि तथागतस् बुद्धस् तथागतस् नास्ति नास्तिक मत विद्धि.
Yatha hi chora sa tatha hi buddhas tathagatam nastika mata vidhi. Meaning that the Buddha Tathagat is tantamount to a thief and the Tathagat's doctrine is atheistic. So it can be seen from this verse that the Vedic Brahmins of the time had already started to tear down and destroy Buddhadharma. It was specifically the Vedic Brahmins who did this and not Brahmins in general, because there were many Buddhist Brahmins as well during those times. And Pushyamitra Shunga also did the same. It may be that he read the same Ramayana and thus started destroying Buddhadharma based on that. But then again, the Ramayana may have been written only after the name Saket was changed to Ayodhya, as the oldest Ramayana, which is Valmiki Ramayana, contains the name Ayodhya Kanda. Then after the Ramayana came the Purans. They include the Harivamsha Puran, Vishnu Puran, Bhagavad Puran, which is also called Srimad Bhagavat, Garud Puran, Padma Puran, Linga Puran, Agni Puran, Naradya Puran, Skanda Puran, and Bhavishya Puran. All these Purans contain stories that are written in such a way that as the general populace reads them and or listens to them, they will eventually engender feelings of anger and aversion towards Buddhadharma and towards the Buddha. All these Purans contain the narrative that the Asuras or demigods practiced the Vedas and became powerful and started defeating the Devas or gods and goddesses. Now, the question that arises here is, were the Devas not practicing the Vedas themselves, so that the Asuras instead got more powerful than the Devas after practicing them? So when the Asuras started becoming victorious, the Devas went to Vishnu and requested him to help them. And Vishnu told them, "Do not worry, I will generate an incarnation of my worst aspect, that is the Maya Moha avatar, or deceptive incarnation, which will lead the Asuras down a false path. That will cause them to become weaker and weaker, and you can then win over them." This in general is the story that is recounted in all of the Purans. There are a few differences, such as with the Srimad Bhagavat saying, Anjana Sutta Kikateshu Bhavishyati, meaning that a son of Anjana, a Brahmin woman, would be born in Gaya, And the Bhavishya Puran also mentions Sudhodan, Gautam, the Shakyamuni, and Shakyasimha. But the point implied in all of them is still the same as in the other Purans. Now let's examine why these stories were written. What do they mean? How did they affect the devotees and the general public as they listened to these stories over time? First of all, the stories refer to the Buddha as someone who came to lead the Asuras away from the teachings of the Vedas by teaching them a wrong path. But the question that arises here is, why then did he come to the human realm? If he was supposed to mislead the Asuras, he should have been born in the Asura Lok or the demigod realm. Asuras belong to a different realm. So, what the stories are really trying to do here is to point to Buddhists as the Asuras they refer to. But since Buddhadharma only came into being after the Buddha came and taught, then at the time the story took place with the Devas requesting help from Vishnu, there would not have been any Buddhadharma nor Buddhists for them to point to. But these stories were actually only composed after the 3rd century, that is 800 or 1000 years after the Buddha. And thus, by the time the Purans were written, Buddhism was already flourishing. It had spread widely. And many Brahmins had become Buddhists as well. And that is why the Purans contained the verse, Kalau Brahmana Rakshasa, meaning that the Brahmins of the Kali Yuga or the current degenerate age are demons. Although, of course, when they said this, they also called themselves demons, as they are also from the same Kali Yuga. But in actuality, this statement was directed towards Buddhist Brahmins, even though that is not specified clearly in the wording. But they did not seem to have realized that when they said the Brahmins of Kali Yuga are demons, they would also fall in the same category. And any Brahmin who repeats this verse today also does not realize that he also falls in that same category. Secondly, these Purans, such as in verses 1 to 3 of the 16th chapter of the Agni Puran and verses 13 to 18 of the 18th chapter of the Vishnu Puran, say that if one adopts the path taught by the Buddha, it will lead to rebirth in the hell realms. And as part of the creation of these Purans, various customs such as Sapta and Nava were started, where the Purans were recited continuously for a specific period, like a week or 9 days. And people, especially the uneducated or the general public, would listen to these recitations. And slowly it started to get into the minds of the people that if the path of the Buddha was followed, then one would go to hell, and that the Buddha had taught the path that leads to hell. So this was the strategy that was adopted in the Purans such as the Harivamsha Puran and the Vishnu Puran. And it is the same in the Srimad Bhagavad Puran as well, where it is said, Anjana Sutta Kikateshu, or son of Anjana, born in Kikat. And we have talked about this point many times already, that there is no historical evidence of a Buddha that is mentioned in that Puran. Even if such a Buddha had come to the human realm instead of the Asura realm, there should still have been historical records regarding him. That Puran states that he was born, but there are no records nor inscriptions whatsoever about where such a Buddha was born, whom he taught, and what happened to his teachings. Nothing at all. Historically, there is only one Buddha, Shakyamuni, who was born in Lumbini in Nepal, and his teachings are still extant. It is not that his teachings only existed during the times these Purans were written, but they are still alive and continuing now as well. And at that time in South Asia, and especially in what is now the present-day India, Buddhism was flourishing. About 60 to 75% of the Indian subcontinent were Buddhists. That is why the Vedic Brahmins felt threatened, and so created many such fairy tales, using the names of Krishna, Ram, etc. to try and subdue Buddhadharma. One of the goals of these compositions was to gradually induce hatred in the people towards the Buddha and Buddhadharma and convert them into their followers instead. Such themes can also be found in the Garud Puran, Padma Puran, Linga Puran, Agni Puran, Naradya Puran, Skanda Puran and Bhavishya Puran. And thus such a strategy of subjugation began. Then in the 6th century, there is the story of Mihirkul, a Hun king of Kashmir who was a Shaivite, which was written in the Rajat Rangini by Kalana, a writer belonging to Mihirkul's own court.
मिहिरकुलले काश्मीरदेखि अफगानिस्तानसम्म 16,000 स्तूप भत्काए.
The story states that Mihirkul demolished 16,000 stupas spanning from Kashmir to Afghanistan. He demolished thousands of monasteries and handed over the land they seized to the Brahmins. Most of the Brahmins did accept those lands, but there were some Brahmins who refused to take them, saying that they did not want land seized by killing their own brothers and sisters. Here I do not mean Brahmins in general. These were Vedic Brahmins or Hindu Brahmins who said this and refused. And there were also Jain Brahmins at that time, as many Brahmins became Jains as well. Thus Mihirkul's exploits of destruction are written about in the Rajat Rangini and were also recorded by Huensang, a Chinese guru who walked 10,000 miles from China to come and study in Nalanda and was from around the same time, from the 7th century. Huensang has written about how Mihirkul had murdered, oppressed, and persecuted Buddhists in his writings named Siyuki. And this is also found in the writings of another Chinese, Yung Li. Then there was Shashank, the king of Gaur. Gaur lies in the northwest of Bengal, and generally the regions of northwest Bengal are referred to as Gaur. He went to Bodh Gaya and cut down the Bodhi tree there. Not only did he cut it down, he also burnt out its remaining stump to ensure that it would not grow again. But King Ashoka's daughter had previously taken a graft of the Bodhi tree to Sri Lanka, which grew into a large tree there, which still exists. And the graft of that same tree has also reached Tanzania and Malaysia, among other places. And it is said that after the time of Shashank, the Sri Lankan Theravadins came and replanted the tree in Bodh Gaya. But some people also say that another tree actually grew out of the old tree there. But the tree that grew from the graft of the original Bodhi tree still exists there in Sri Lanka. This is also written about by Huensang in Siyuki. Also during the time of Huensang, a king named Kumar Raj wrote a letter to Nalanda demanding that Huensang present himself at his court, threatening that otherwise he would completely destroy Nalanda. Thus, under the threat of Nalanda being destroyed, Huensang went there and met the king. Kumar Raj had been curious as to why Huensang had come all the way there from China to study Buddhadharma, when the Vedas also contained many things. After the meeting, he let Huensang return to Nalanda. And after studying there at Nalanda for many years, the gurus there requested Huensang to remain to teach at Nalanda, as he was very bright. And the gurus at Nalanda included not just Indians. It is said that around that same time, Lila Vajra, the guru from Sakhu in Nepal, also taught there. Thus the gurus requested Huensang to teach there, and he taught there at Nalanda for many years. And then later he traveled all around South Asia, including Bangladesh and Nepal. So this was around the time of King Kumar Raj and King Shashank, that is around the 7th century.